What's up again, everybody? Today we're going to talk about PVE, the player versus environment co-op solo play idea, the thing that's been sort of floating around in Flesh and Blood, I guess since they announced and showed off Coax a Commotion, which kind of was one of those scenarios where like, oh, this is the perfect card to play for Ultimate Pit Fight because it's got incentives for people to allow it to hit. But then again, you're also battling against your opponent. You may not want to take damage, that sort of thing. But it has amazing play in PvE if you're teaming up with friends playing against, like this imaginary foe. And that's what I want to talk about today because I have some feelings about PvE, both with regards to the fact that we could see it very soon, maybe even something as soon as this supplemental set, Everfest. I got it right. I said Everfest and not EverQuest. Boom! Nailed it. I don't have to re-record this intro because we could see it in Everfest depending on how they structure the set, though I do think it's a little less likely for us to be able to see like a big inclusion of that, and I do think it's something they would want to release. LSS would want to release it in perhaps its own secondary, like its own product kind of a thing. But we could see it as soon as Everfest, and we could see it at some point next year as well, which could be very exciting. And I do want to say this: I personally believe that PvE has the capacity to draw in the most new players out of anything that I could possibly think of, except maybe a Netflix show. But even then, I don't know if like a Netflix show would draw in a player base or if that would draw in, people that wanted to collect versus play. It could definitely draw in a player base. Nevertheless, it's going to be a good thing either way. I do think that PvE is probably the single biggest move that LSS could make going forward for the player base to get new players into the game, because it taps into an already sort of established audience of co-op games, of co-op board games even, and of D&D. And D&D is a huge pull to this game because there are so many parallels from this game to D&D. You have equipment slots, you have weapons that you can swap out. Yes, you play with a deck of cards, but you're playing down attacks similar to how you're calling out attacks in D&D that you want to use and then roll on and do things like that. So there's a lot of parallels. Of course, the fantasy setting in most D&D campaigns, minus some homebrews, and the dark fantasy aesthetic of the world of Wraith are natural fits to coexist and commingle. It's sort of its own homebrew D&D campaign already, which is kind of cool. And so you could see some nice little cross-play that way. Maybe you create a D&D campaign, and I just had this idea. You create a D&D campaign in the world of Wraith. Now that would be a good time. You can make a brute, basically like a giant orc. You could anyway, I'm gonna start thinking about that. I have played a good bit of D&D, a bunch of D&D. I DM'd my own campaign, a homebrew campaign I made, and the parallels are totally there from that game to this game. And LSS has even said that like one of their target audiences is D&D players, and PvE co-op is the way to target that. So I think they should do that, and they should release it very soon. Like a lot of people have said, they should release PvE, but I don't necessarily think we as a community have to wait for LSS to drop a PvE product, though I'm sure whatever LSS has cooked up is going to be awesome. I think we can come up with some really cool variants ourselves, and that's what we've seen. So I want to show you this. I'm going to pop something on the screen really quick. Let's see if I got it. This is a free PDF that you can download. Super shout out to Decks and Drafts, Joey, and to Tim that created this PvE variant. It's very full-fledged. Talks all about like the how you'd actually go about playing it. By the way, you should check out his Patreon. He's got a Patreon. You should scan that and become a patron because he's a cool dude. But no, it talks about like how he wants PvE to be set up and then how you go about playing it. And there's like, you can look at this and you can go, well, that's cool, but I would do this. That is totally okay. You can make changes in any way, shape, or form that you see fit. But in this scenario, that you would pick any number of players, including one player, which you could just play this as solo, which is great. You choose how you want to structure your decks. You choose whatever you want to do for all of this. Again, leaving it super open and allowing players to kind of do this. In this scenario, in this sort of mechanic-wise scenario, he's got everyone playing against like a hero or, that sort of thing. And the hero has a deck that they're going to play cards off the top of, and there are some rules based on that, and then they get like just a large amount of health, 50 based on the number of players, or 50 and then number of players times 100. So basically you have to like grind out this game against a super powered, super healthy hero. And then they'll just like actually play out cards. They get a couple of resources. They could have bad turns based on what they flip over off the top of the deck. This is one way that you can do PvE. You give the automaton a deck. You give the like bad guy a deck, and you randomize it, like shuffle it, and then you flip over a card and you reveal what that card is, and if they have the resource points to pay for it, then they play the card, and it has go again because he says the first card each turn will have go again, and they keep doing that process. So that's one way that you can structure D&D esque gameplay, co-op-esque gameplay within Flesh and Blood. This is a fantastic way to do this, and I highly encourage you, if I can grab this link, and remember, I'll put this down in the description, highly encourage you to download this and try this variant with your friends, because there are things like, for example, if you didn't see this, life gain is more. There are more, like, is upgraded, so life gain is better. There are other effects that you kind of have to know how they work based on this structure. He gives you, and this is great, this is what Joey's a fantastic provider of resources for the community. He gives a sample deck list that you can construct and then just kind of carry on from place to place, which is kind of cool. Yeah, this is a fantastic way to tackle PvE. But I was actually, here's the thing, I've been thinking about this for a couple of months now, so I sat down and tooled around with something. I think there's another way, and perhaps simpler, but maybe not as nuanced. It depends on how you structure it. I think there's another way to play PvE, and so I mocked up a card, okay? Here's a card I mocked up. I'm going to put that on the screen. So this is the other way that you could actually structure a PvE enemy to play out. Instead of randomizing attacks from a deck and having to carry a deck around, you just take the card and you roll dice to see what happens. And essentially what this allows you to do is it allows you each turn, like a player can take the die and roll it, and there's that moment of like, oh crap, what's this thing gonna do? And like, oh, you rolled the die because last time you rolled it something good happened or something not terrible happened, and last time I rolled it I like exploded, right? So there's that possibility of like what comes up on the die that could be really exciting. And so I created a cool looking dragon. This is not my art. I literally just took the bordering as well from Kano, so don't think that like this is super fancy. Veldarath the Hungry, he gets to do actions and pay nothing and then roll a 6-sided die. On 1 or 2, deal 5 damage to an opponent. And I structured this really quickly. I kind of came up with the idea really quick, but I think this functionality-wise is super intuitive and very easy to set up, because you just slam the card down, put out a D whatever. You could have a bunch of abilities on the card, like a D6. You could bump it all the way up to like a D20, like a 20-sided die. You could get a D20 and you can just start rolling for effects. But by the way, if you roll a 3 or a 4, deal 6 damage to target opponent. If it hits a hero, create a wounding token under their control. So it creates tokens as well. And then a 5 or a 6, deal 7 to all opponents, like a fire breath thing. If it hits, create a smoldering token. And of course, tokens are sort of like status effects, like bleeding or like burning, that sort of stuff. So these tokens can come out, and this is a very easy way to structure like a kit. So for example, if you're LSS and you're like, okay, we want to be able to get these kits into hands of LGSs so they can run tournaments, we're just going to print a bunch of these cards, or a few of these cards that they're going to battle, along with some other things that people can sit down and battle, some other creatures. And we are going to put a die in there and put a bunch of prize cards or like equipment cards that players can randomly be given based on their performance within the like battle, for example. And this thing automates itself essentially, which is kind of nice. It's the same as a deck, but you don't have to pack a deck into a box at this point. You just have to have a D6 and a well thought out plan. Like for example, just looking at this, like, okay, who's going to make the targets? You can come up with like a randomized way to target. So like it becomes that person on this turn, then there on the next turn, then there on the next turn, that sort of thing. But you create like a structure around this, and then it just comes down to creating the cards themselves. So you could have like a big old frog thing that like spawns little frog things that attack, and so you have these little cards that start popping up out of nowhere if your opponent doesn't deal with it, and then those are little enemies that can be targeted for attacks as well. It's structured so well, Flesh and Blood is, I mean, it's structured so well for these kinds of ideas to be community created. And so if there's anything that I can say, I want to highly encourage you to create stuff like this and try these variants out, see if they function, see what your friends and you think about this. I even went so far as to make, by the way, there is a prize card. Do you want to see what you would win if you defeat this thing? Here it is. Boom, look, you get an alley piece. The thing had an alley piece for some reason. Alley piece, it's like a one-handed crossbow. Once per turn, instance pays 0. You can put an arrow from your hand face up into an empty arsenal zone. If you do, it gains go again. And -1. Thought it'd be kind of funny to give something a -1 effect. But you get the guaranteed go again. You don't have to pay for it, and then you load up like an arrow that you want to give go again to immediately. It makes for, like, a card like this would make for a fun, like, I have a sword, I have a bow, you know, so maybe it's not even a ranger weapon. Maybe you change it, you make it a generic, and you play like a one-handed sword and an alley piece. You're just like running around like slashing and shooting. Basically all I'm saying is I'm trying to make a pirate here, people. I want this in my life is what I'm trying to say. Essentially, we just need to make more pirates in Flesh and Blood, or a pirate in Flesh and Blood. But that would be a fun little like thing to receive. Like, you turn it over, you get a rainbow foil little card. And it's packaged alongside of this set of bosses that rotate out, or you know, that are sort of like an armory kit, where 1 month you get 1 set of bosses, the next month you get a new set of bosses, maybe like 3 bosses in each pack that your friends and you can play through at the LGS. It's a fantastic way for, again, you to encourage LGS play in a new way, that you're still getting people into the stores where they can still make purchases and make connections and that sort of thing. So I truly believe that this variant can be, or this like idea, this whole thing can be community created. I want people to create these kinds of cards, and then, I don't know, maybe you can custom print cards with a new layout so it doesn't infringe on copyrights, and you try it out with your friends and see what comes of it. I think it could be really, really cool. I hope you guys like this idea, or you like the thought of coming up with your own variants, because I want people to take Flesh and Blood and morph it into things that they enjoy as well, because that's kind of like one of my favorite things to watch in communities. It's like communities taking something and making it their own. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Maybe you learned something, I don't know. Check out the link for the variant that I talked about earlier from Decks and Drafts in the comments section below. Leave a comment if you'd like, and hit the button if you want to do that as well. As always, everybody, thanks for watching.